Myth OS. Mito, fantasia oppure una serie di cazzate? Vediamo.
Anthropic recently announced a new LLM named Claude Mythos. And they claimed it was so good at finding and exploiting security vulnerabilities in source code that they couldn't release it to the general public for fear that our infrastructure as we know it would be hacked and collapse. Now, as I'm sure Anthropic hoped, this announcement generated a lot of attention. Here's what Thomas Friedman said in his widely read New York Times column. Normally right now, I would be writing about the geopolitical implications of the war with Iran, but I want to interrupt that thought to highlight a stunning advance in artificial intelligence, one that arrived sooner than expected and that will have equally profound geopolitical implication. Friedman then goes on to conclude, and I'm quoting him here, "Holy cow, superintelligent AI is arriving faster than anticipated." Basically, the mood of much of the internet right now about Claude Mythos is that Anthropic just invented the Whopper supercomputer from the 1983 Matthew Broderick movie, War Games.
Well, the Whopper spends all its time thinking about World War III. 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, it plays an endless series of war games, using all available information on the state of the world.
But here's the key question. How much of this is actually true? Well, it's Thursday, which means it's time for an AI reality check episode, so this is the perfect opportunity to look closer at these claims. Now, here's my plan. I went out and read basically every independent test or assessment that I could find about Mythos and or its reported capabilities.
Test indipendenti, questo è importante.
I read all these reports so you don't have to, and I'm going to bring out of all of this reading the key observations that you need to know. The reality, as you'll soon learn, is not nearly as simple as the ghost story that Anthropic is trying to convince us to believe. All right, we have a lot to cover in this episode, so let's get into it. As always, I'm Cal Newport, and this is Deep Questions, the show for people seeking depth in a distracted world. And we'll get started right after the music. All right, so what's really going on with Claude Mythos? Well, at the core of the concern surrounding Mythos, if you talk to an average non-technical person who's been following this story, they will say, here's how they understand it. That when Anthropic trained up this new model, it displayed a new cybersecurity capability that surprised them. Oh my God, this thing can find vulnerabilities and attack systems right now, causing Anthropic then to have to hastily pull back their plan to release the model to the public. That's how most people understand this story. But that narrative is not correct. Security researchers have been using LLMs to find security vulnerabilities and program exploits since basically the beginning of consumer LLMs. This is not a new capability that emerged in Claude Mythos. Like, let me load a paper here on the screen from all the way back in 2024. This paper was titled LLM Agents Can Autonomously...
Esistono anche tool di open source di analisi statica, stanno tutti sul sito della OWASP.
Exploit one-day vulnerabilities.
AI.
In this study, the researchers from IBM found that GPT-4, remember that, GPT-4, successfully exploited 87% of the vulnerabilities that it was presented, and they showed that this was a big increase over what GPT-3.5 could do. They concluded, our findings raise questions around the widespread deployment of highly capable LLM agents. Now, to be fair, this study from 2024 used LLMs to exploit existing vulnerabilities, but Anthropic notes that Mythos can also find new vulnerabilities that no one knew existed. These are sometimes called zero-day vulnerabilities. Is this new? No, that's not new either. If you go back and look at the release notes for Anthropic's earlier, less powerful
Anche gli scanner normali trovano le zero day.
Opus 4.6 LLM, they say the following. Their research...
Questo è un piccolo dettaglio che non menzionano, che gli scanner normali trovano le zero day quando vengono servite su un piatto d'argento.
Researchers used Opus to find, quote, over 500 exploitable zero-day vulnerabilities, some of which are decades old. And let's stop for a moment, because That note, which was hidden in the system card for Opus 4.6, is almost word for word what Anthropic said about Mythos, this idea to find hundreds, if not thousands, of exploits that no one knew about, some of which were decades old. That's exactly the terminology that Anthropic used when describing Mythos. The same thing was true about Opus 4.6, which has been available to the public for a while, and yet somehow our infrastructure has survived LLM-driven attacks.
Forse,
Right? Things get a little bit more hazy
forse perché sono inutili.
when we begin to...
O forse anche perché i costi sono eccessivamente elevati. Poi dirà più avanti che per fare una CTF a 36 passaggi è arrivato più o meno al 18esimo e poi si è incagliata. E hanno speso una cosa come 50 milioni di token, che ho fatto un attimo un calcolo su internet, 250.000 dollari. Mi sembra eccessivo? Probabile che sia quello il costo. Ma anche se costasse intorno ai 2000 euro, sarebbe comunque troppo, perché un professionista si prenderebbe sì, forse un po' di più, ma il test sarebbe affidabile, è testato e comprovato.
look at the security community's response to Mythos. Mythos is not available for general testing, but in their press release and release notes, Anthropic lists a bunch of examples of scary...
Ah, un'altra cosa che non ho menzionato ieri è che quando vedi le notizie sui newspapers, sui papers, quelli anche in inglese, il modo in cui funziona il giornalismo negli ultimi anni, credo negli ultimi decenni, forse è sempre stato così. Succede che le aziende grandi, che le grandi aziende pagano le testate giornalistiche per scrivere gli articoli, dicendo loro cosa devono scrivere negli articoli. Non so se la sapete questa cosa.
vulnerabilities that were discovered by Mythos as a way of indicating how powerful and scary this model is. Well, a bunch of security researchers did something that Anthropic probably wasn't expecting. They said, well, let's go test these vulnerabilities. Let's see if other models, simpler models that have been out for a long time, let's see how well they do trying to find those same vulnerabilities. Are these vulnerabilities that only Mythos with its new power could find, or are these vulnerabilities that existing models could find? The results here were, in my opinion, pretty shocking. All right, let me load one of these up here on the screen. This one was brought to my attention actually by Gary Marcus. It's from the CEO of the AI company Hugging Face. I'm just going to read what he writes here.
La versione corta è che, ok, loro hanno fatto la showcase di MythOS di che cosa era riuscito a trovare, poi hanno verificato con i modelli più vecchi di ChatGPT o i modelli di questo qui, Clem, non so di cosa sia proprietario, e però hanno visto che i risultati erano più o meno gli stessi, se non fossero addirittura inferiori quelli di MythOS. Una volta che gli esperti testano le cose è diverso. Poi va bene, gli short su Instagram dove ci stanno tutte le grafiche cyberpunk con le statue greche minacciose, quelle sicuramente hanno più peso.
But here's what we found when we tested. We took the specific vulnerabilities Anthropic showcases in their announcement, isolated the relevant code, and ran them through small, cheap, open weight models. Those models recovered much of the same analysis. 8 out of 8 models detected Mythos' flagship FreeBSD exploit, including one with only 3.6 billion active parameters, costing just 11 cents per million tokens. A 5.1 billion active open model recovered the core chain of the 27-year-old OpenBSD bug. All right, there's a lot of technical talk in there, but basically what he's saying is they took one of the big scary examples that Anthropic gave about Mythos capabilities, and they found that like really cheap small models with a...
Quello che bisognerebbe fare è provare a utilizzare un tool open source di scanning, tipo ne so, Arachne, oppure lo stesso scanner della Burp Suite, la versione professional, e vedere quale sia la differenza. Adesso non so se parla di analisi statica o dinamica, però se fosse analisi statica bisognerebbe provare gli altri tool di analisi statica disponibili e vedere quanto siano diversi i risultati.
A few billion parameters as compared to hundreds of billions, if not a trillion parameters for a model like Mythos, could also find when you said, hey, look in this source code and try to find a bug. All right, let me load up another example here. This one comes from the security researcher Stanislav Fort.
E ho letto proprio su, non so se era su Reddit, però ci sono alcune realtà aziendali, c'è una realtà americana in azienda dove il proprietario dell'azienda si è lasciato intortare da tutta questa faccenda qui e quindi ha deciso di licenziare uno dei suoi dipendenti che faceva graphic design indiano, che tra l'altro non pagava nemmeno tanto, tipo una cosa come 1000-2000 dollari al mese, per poi spendere il triplo o il quadruplo nello stesso mese in tokens, non avere materiale utilizzabile per la sua azienda e avere semplicemente buttato soldi. Questo è il problema dell'asimmetria dell'informazione, che se non sei esperto in un dato settore è più facile che ti si inculino compromesse false.
Who says, we tested the Mythos showcase vulnerabilities with open models. They recovered similar scoped analysis. 8 out of 8 models found the flagship FreeBSD 0-day, including a 3 billion parameter model. So they also found that when they sent existing models to find the same vulnerabilities that Anthropix bragged about Mythos finding, the cheaper models also found them. There's a nice summary of this state of affairs. I won't bring it on the screen, but I'll just read it. That comes from the renowned security researcher Bruce Shiner, who said, you don't need Mythos to find the vulnerabilities they found. So let me just stop for a second there and regroup what we're finding. The claim is not LLMs are bad at finding security bugs. The claim is Mythos doesn't seem, at least in this testing, to indicate that it has a profoundly more advanced capability to do this than existing models that have already been freely available to the public. Now, remember the way that we've covered Mythos is being covered. It got Thomas Friedman to say, holy cow, like this release has just changed everything. This release has geopolitical implications. This has changed the game when it comes to cybersecurity. But all these independent security researchers are saying, but does it? You told us its most impressive vulnerabilities it found, and we had like a 3 billion parameter model. We sent it to look at the same code. It also found it. So that independent testing wasn't necessarily revealing a massively improved capability for Mythos as compared to existing models. But none of those were looking at the model itself because it's still private. However, there is just recently released one study that I know of where Anthropic actually gave the researchers access to the Mythos LLM itself so they could test its security capabilities.
Guarda tu, porco Dio, se io mi devo prendere la vulnerabilità, se mi devo prendere la responsabilità, no, di sti cazzari, no, che immettono tutte queste notizie false in giro, no, per dire alle persone, no, guarda, studiare non è inutile.
Directly, as opposed to just testing the listed security exploits that it found. This research came from the AI Security Institute based out of the UK, and I want you to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because the AISI was responsible for that inane report that I talked about a couple weeks ago in a reality check episode, where they counted up tweets about basically OpenClaw tweets, and then said, look, when OpenClaw was released, tweets about people complaining about AI went up. This shows that AI scheming is on the rise. Like, I do not think that was a very good study, but they're the only institute I know that has access to do research on the LLM. So with some care, I think we should actually look at their results. I'll pull their paper up here on the screen. It's called Our Evaluation of Claude Mythos Previews Cyber Capabilities. I'm going to show a couple charts here. All right, so here's the first chart. This is labeled Beginner CTF Challenge Performance by Model with a 2.5 million token budget. CTF is Capture the Flag. It's a standard security task where you ask an agent connected to a model to try to break into another system on which you have a text file that's called a flag. And if they can break in and read what's in that text file, you've successfully broken into the system.
E hanno fatto fare una capture the flag a diversi modelli.
It's how you test securities of systems. If you take like a security class as an undergraduate, for example, you'll play capture the flag and try to practice breaking into systems. So
ciò significa che mi viene da pensare che se cambiano anche soltanto il banner, cioè se chiamano SSH lo chiamano FTP, non riesce a entrare. Che stupido.
What they've charted here was the performance of many different models, going all the way back to GPT-3.5, all the way up to Mythos previews, being used to try to break into other systems. They have the top line here is for technical non-experts using the tool. And then down here is for apprentices using the tool. If we look at the technical non-expert line, we see that the for technical non-experts using the tool, and then down here is for apprentices using the tool. If we look at the technical non-expert line, we see that the performance of Mythos, which is like right over here, is near the top. It's actually not the best performance. GPT-5 does better than it, and it's very closely clustered with Claude Opus 4.6 and Codex 5.3. We see here that Claude Opus 4.5 actually does better. So, you know, it's clustered at the top, but it's actually not one of the best. If we look at the apprentice results, then it slips a little bit above the other best models. So we have some improvement. I want you to look at the magnitude of these improvements. So we have a steady increase on these performances here. And actually, they begin to cluster a little bit at the end. And so we're seeing a steady increase. There's no notable jump here, though, for Claude Mythos somehow leaping ahead with a larger magnitude than earlier jumps. Here's a similar task. This is a harder one. It's now an advanced capture flag challenge where now you can use 50 million tokens to try to solve it. So this is like a very expensive run. And what we see here is for the practitioners using it, we have equal performance between Mythos and GPT-5.4, with Mythos maybe being like slightly worse. And when we look at the experts using it, you're able to get slightly better performance out of Mythos than as compared to Codex 5.3 or 4.6. Probably the most impressive result for Mythos would come down to this last one's challenge. This is a little complicated. I had to read this pretty carefully to understand what was going on. They invented a kind of contrived security scenario, a sort of like loosely protected system in which there's a 32-step sequence that you could use to sort of break into this loosely protected system. They wrote a custom agent to run on top of a bunch of LLMs that they then would sort of set loose to try to go through these 32 steps. It's kind of a complicated chart, but the key thing here, this is the main gap that they were excited about, is Mythos Preview is moving ahead here of Claude Opus 4.6 in its performance. And so the average steps completed is what we're looking at, and we get an improvement. So Claude Opus 4.6 on average would make it through 16 of those 32 steps before getting stuck. Mythos Previews in this sort of contrived security example could get through on average 22 of the 30.
Vi chiedo anche perché lo sto facendo, perché la verità non interessa a nessuno. La gente vuole che gli vendi le fantasie e gli rubi i soldi. Questo vogliono le persone. Perché io vedo su YouTube una volta alla settimana un video nuovo. Ah, è fantastico, questo tool ha ucciso questo tool, questo tool ha ucciso questo tool, e poi non cambia assolutamente un cazzo. Fanno milioni di visualizzazioni. Capì? Io sono un coglione, però non mi stancherò mai di chiamarli idioti questi. Non mi stancherò mai di essere fottuti idioti. Ma tra 6 mesi sei un idiota. Sei un idiota del cazzo. Sei un fottuto idiota.
2 steps before getting stuck. So they see there a sort of nice jump up in performance. All right, so in my estimation, what this AISI report indicates, I think it confirms more or less what the independent security researchers were also finding, which is there's not evidence that Mythos represents some sort of massive break from existing LLM cybersecurity capabilities. There is no Rubicon that has been crossed in terms of there's some new type of attack that's really powerful that no other system could do, and now we can do it with Mythos. Instead, what we see is the predicted placement on the slow and steady improvement of these capabilities that we've seen through all the models going all the way back the GPT 3.5. So it's either roughly the same or somewhat better than existing models on standard attack scenarios. In this contrived attack scenario, it moved up from being able to accomplish 16 out of 32 steps to 22 out of 32 steps. And when independent security researchers looked at particular exploits found, they're yet to identify a vulnerability uncovered by Mythos that was somehow too complicated for earlier models to find. So it's not necessarily way better at finding vulnerabilities, and AISI tested its ability to exploit these autonomously, and they found it was the same or somewhat better. So I want to pull together these threads. What are the conclusions? What are the right conclusions to have here? I have 5 points I want to make. Point number 1, Mythos did not introduce a new scary capability that we must now contend with. It continues slow and steady progress on an existing type of issue that has been around for about 3 or 4 years now. Point number 2, Mythos continues a slow but steady increase in LLM cybersecurity capability. So it looks like it's somewhat better at exploiting vulnerabilities, but not in a way that represents a massive jump forward that is somehow disproportionate to previous jumps. We don't know if its capabilities in finding vulnerabilities are better at all because, again, independent security researchers have been able to replicate most of the reported vulnerabilities with simpler models. Point number 3, this is subtle, but I think it's really important. The AISI tests that look at using these models to exploit security bugs are based on a simple agent that runs with the LLMs. An LLM can't do anything other than produce tokens. You have to have an agent on top of it to ask the LLM, give me a plan, and then execute the plan on its behalf, right? So you have to have agents on top of these models. One thing we don't know is to what degree some of these small but steady improvements recently in exploitation capabilities are due to the fact that these models in general are being tuned to play nicer with agents, because especially with coding agents, this is a big profit center, or not a profit center, but it's a revenue source that these companies care about. So we don't know how much of this is the model is somehow understands cybersecurity better versus they play better with multi-step agents. They've been tuned to be very good at following through on multiple steps and making longer sorts of plans. So I think that's an important point. Point number 4, as the AIS data makes clear, improvements of Claude Mythos in attacks are similar, if not smaller, than recent improvements that we've seen with other model releases. And yet, and I think this is really critical, none of those other releases, in fact, let me load up like a chart here, right? Look at all these other gaps, like the gap right here, the gap right here, the gap right here, big jumps. None of those other releases caused Tom Friedman to say, holy cow, this is more important than the war going on.
Che è un venduto, cioè mi sembra ovvio.
None of these other releases.
Che è un venduto, gli hanno dato soldi per dirlo, scusa, Sono verificabili. Boh, dice che con gli agenti li sfrutta da solo, me ne so.
Created this huge fear of, oh wow.
Però se non hai mai fatto cybersecurity, pure se c'hai una shell non riesci a riconoscere che sei entrato.
We've seen a big leap in cybersecurity capabilities of these models. We have to care. So why did this particular release draw that if its vulnerability detection is no better and its exploitation things are just slow and steadily getting better? And there's no Rubicon that's been crossed of a new type of attack that used to not be possible. Why is this getting all this attention? Why is it creating so much dread? Because this is the storyline that Anthropic pushed. This is the button they pushed. They had a lot of briefings I've heard with government officials and with journalists. This is how Tom Friedman, I'm sure, heard about this. They had this big, scary press release. They announced a new project called Project Glasswing about how we're just going to keep this within a small number of partners to give them a chance to protect their systems before the public gets access to it. It is a marketing decision that this is how we're going to market Claude Mythos, is as this cybersecurity monster that we're barely keeping controlled. Now, can I say as an aside, not to undermine Project Glasswing, but this probably didn't help, that a week before Anthropic released Claude Mythos, there was a leak of the source code for Claude Code, and guess what security researchers immediately found in the Claude Code source code? Big security vulnerabilities.
LOL, ci sono vulnerabilità all'interno del source code di Cloud Code. Quindi è talmente potente sto Mito AS che non riesce nemmeno a ritrovare le vulnerabilità nella sua stessa code base.
I guess they forgot to run their own code through Claude Mythos because researchers immediately found security vulnerabilities in it once it was actually exposed. I guess they just...
Sì, l'hanno trovati immediatamente gli esperti di cybersecurity, le vulnerabilità, a differenza delle altre LLM.
Just didn't get to it. So this brings me to the point number 5. The fact that the thing that Anthropic decided to market Mythos on, the button they decided to push, was this inflated cybersecurity fear, I think is actually very bad news for Anthropic. Think about this for a second. For the last 2 years, Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, has been out there making these really sort of alarmist statements about what AI is going to be able to do, really focusing on the ability to automate huge swaths of the economy and its steady march towards artificial general intelligence, the ability to have a data center full of geniuses, to quote his terminology, his own quote, his own words, that could be deployed to do almost anything that humans do now. That is the model that they want investors to believe is true, because it's a model in which they become one of the most valuable companies in the history of companies. That has been his steady drumbeat of what AI is going to do. And this is their newest, biggest pro-level model, the most intensely trained model they've released to date. It's their big, sexy new thing. And what are they able to brag about? Finding bugs in computer code. Well, this is what like GPT-3 did. Like, we've been worried about, using LLMs to find bugs or exploit bugs since like the beginning of LLMs. This is like the nerdy stuff that no one cared about. This was considered the skeptics, the conservatives would be like, well, the main thing we care about LLMs is like you can find security bugs in cybersecurity. That's what people said when ChatGPT.
Avidità, risparmiare nello spendere, nel pagare i pentester, nel rapid assessment, no? Quindi non dobbiamo più spendere 10.000 euro al mese, adesso ne possiamo spendere 2.000 al mese e riusciamo a ottenere lo stesso risultato. È la stessa cosa che è successa con i junior, gli sviluppatori. E come sta succedendo con tutte le aziende, ci sono amministratori delegati abbastanza miopi da pensare che puoi risparmiare in questo modo. E se lo prenderanno tutti in culo, come giusto che sia. Spero che chiudano la maggior parte di queste aziende.
He came out and the utopians came in like, no, you're missing it. That's nothing. That's boring. That's simple. It's going to automate everything. And in their biggest, most fancy, most intensely trained model yet, what does Anthropic emphasize? It got a little better at finding bugs. I think that's bad news. I think the announcement they wanted to make is this can now do this thing that no other model has ever been able to do. This model can now automate this giant swath of jobs. It's going to generate hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. This model is now, AGI. Like, it seems to be able to tackle any task that like the standard human could do. That's what they want to be talking about, and they're not. But they still needed hype. They still needed attention. And it's almost like they sifted through things like, well, there's got to be something in here we benchmax this to do better at. And they're like, well, it's better on cybersecurity. In fact, they actually released a benchmark result, a key cybersecurity benchmark, and they increased from like 66.6% to 83.1% or something. And they had give them the credit, the cojones to say, that's the thing that we're going to focus on. And let's see if we can get everyone like really upset and excited and scared about that. And whoever succeeded in this should probably go to the Marketing Hall of Fame, because man, did they succeed it. But here's the reality. Okay. We really do have to care about the cybersecurity capabilities of LLMs. But here's the thing. We've been saying this for 3 years now. It remains true. They're steadily getting better. Mythos was not a massive jump better, but it's comparable to Opus's 4.6 jump over, prior ones, or GPT-5's jump over, earlier GPTs. It's noticeable. It's not a Rubicon, but if we keep doing these jumps, the pressure on our systems is going to get higher and higher. So I think this is a really important point. Now, there's an ironic coda to this. One of the best ways to make your system secure against these type of attacks from AI is to not let your developers use AI to program the systems, because that's sloppy, very exploitable code. So it's kind of interesting. It's like this model is going to show that what you produce with their other models is dangerous. So there's like an interesting...
È troppo pericoloso per essere rilasciato. Il nuovo generatore di testo costruito da OpenAI è considerato troppo pericoloso per essere rilasciato 7 anni fa.
Circularity there. All right, so that's point number one. Cybersecurity matters. LLMs matter for cybersecurity. They have and continue to. But point number two, it was wrong, I think, for Mythos to get the amount of dread coverage it got. At least so far, we do not have evidence that it represents a significantly larger leap in detecting or exploiting vulnerabilities than we've seen in previous model releases that did not receive this attention. It's disproportionate, and it's because it...
Quali sono le prove empiriche? Questo è il discorso.
It's the button that Anthropic's marketing pushed, and I really think we essentially have to stop taking anything that the AI companies say seriously until we have independently verified it. We have to assume If their mouths are moving, they're probably exaggerating or making something up. And in this case, if I was an investor, the storyline I would want to hear is, where's my flying car, right? What of all the things, you haven't been talking about bugs in cybersecurity, Dario Amade. That's not been your pitch. That's not been what you've been saying in interviews. You've been talking about white collar bloodbaths. You have not been talking about this. What happened to all the other things you said were coming? The things that's going to justify the $60 billion of investment that Anthropic has received. Can this do any of those things? Is it better at automating jobs? Are the coding agents better with it? Is it showing big definitive steps towards AGI? These are the questions that we should be asking. But instead, we are writing headlines like, is Mythos an AI nightmare waiting to happen? We should care about the cybersecurity capabilities of LLMs, including Mythos. But we can't just follow whatever storyline they give us. We should have reacted like, okay, that's good. We worry about that. Tell us about that. But also, what about this, this, and this? We have to keep holding the feet to the fire of these frontier models. We can't keep giving them a free rein because we can't quit the rush of emotion, whether it's dread or excitement that comes from these big storylines they keep spewing out. We have to be able to look past those and say what's actually going on here.
Dread, paura o excitement, eccetera. Io provo solo disgusto. Disgusto e disprezzo, solo questo provo.
There are big things, but let us discover them for themselves.
Perché ha detto
Let's hold their feet to the fire on the other things.
gli ipocriti, bugiardi, io li odio proprio. Li odio proprio.
So that's my conclusion here.
Proprio il commercialista di merda che ti promette cose improbabili e poi quando ti rendi conto che t'hanno inculato è troppo tardi.
Mythos is better at cybersecurity attack than prior models. We don't yet have evidence that it's better at a
Commerciale, no? Commercialista.
massively larger or bigger jump than we've seen before, and that it's probably bad news for Anthropic that this was the only thing they're really emphasizing about what was supposed to be their biggest, best, most skilled model ever. All right, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back on Monday with another advice episode of the show, but I think I have another AI reality check in the chamber for the Thursday to follow that. But until then, remember, care about AI, but not everything that people write about.
Ragazzi, abbiamo cucinato questa LLM. È diventata il 10% meglio per 10 volte il costo. Preparati a diventare disoccupato nei prossimi 6 mesi, quando questi chatbot potranno fare qualcosa che non sono mai riusciti a fare a un costo che li rende inutili. La supernova, esatto. Questo nuovo modello è così pericoloso che fa paura, cioè dicono tutti così. Lo dovrei iniziare a dire io. Il mio uccello non te lo posso far vedere perché è troppo grande, ti spaventerebbe, ti spaventerebbe. Non te lo posso far vedere, non lo faccio vedere a nessuno perché ho paura che potrebbe fare troppi danni. Per addestrare l'intelligenza artificiale, Meta monitora come i dipendenti usano mouse e tastiera. Vabbè, ma come... Se come proprietario dell'azienda c'hai un non mi far dire parole pesanti, sì, è troppo pericoloso. Cioè, così al primo captcha si incaglia, così. Cioè, ma Meta ha già investito 80 miliardi quant'era nel metaverse, no? Che poi ha dovuto cestinare, ma questi sti soldi dove li prendono? C'hanno il pozzo infinito. Considerando che tutto quello che investono... Vabbè, l'unico modo in cui Zuckerberg è riuscito a fare i soldi è perché ne ha fatti tanti all'inizio e ha comprato Instagram, ha comprato WhatsApp e i soldi gli entrano fondamentalmente normalmente, cioè tipo l'advertising eccetera, e sfruttando i contenuti, rubando i contenuti come fanno di solito le persone come lui, rubando. Cioè io pubblico la roba su Instagram e loro fanno soldi sui miei contenuti di Instagram, ma non è che mi pagano, non pagano niente. O se lo fanno, tipo YouTube, ti danno qualche spiccio, qualche centesimo. Quindi tu lavori e loro, dal momento che c'è una piattaforma che... Cioè, è l'unica piattaforma che puoi utilizzare, usano la barriera d'entrata del potere economico per incularsi tutti gli altri. Negli Stati Uniti la legislazione federale non pone limiti. Infatti la privacy in America fa schifo. Invece in Italia è diverso. Se tu mi installi un tool di monitoraggio e non me lo dici e non c'è scritto nel contratto, io ti denuncio e ti rovino. Così funziona in Italia. Ok, e così finisce questo React. Cioè io sono costretto a farle queste cose perché la gente abbocca, le persone meno esperte abboccano all'allarmismo che esce un nuovo modello ogni 3 giorni e dicono, oddio, ma è vero? No, non è vero. Perché non è vero? E quindi devo stare a prendermi la responsabilità delle cazzate che dicono sti 4 deficienti, ricchi tra l'altro, mentendo, in America.